What's up, Wizards? You are joining us live for Thursday's previews for the Mario Kart set. We're going to go ahead and get into it because I don't want you to be looking at my desktop background for too long. What will you find? There's nothing weird on there, don't worry. First card of the night has to be a common. That's how we do things. I'm going to let you know most of the commons today, not amazing. You know what I mean? I don't think that we're really, there's not too many great things. So we're going to blast through these today to get to not only the rares, but some like pretty primo. Do people still say? Not since the late 70s. Pretty good uncommons today that I think we'll see like a fair amount of play in different formats for that matter. But to get there, we got to look at Spot Cycle Scouter first, which I guess has a cool color palette in the art. About all I can really say about it. Cards are real 1.7, you know what I mean? It's a 1 and a white for a 3-2 vehicle with crew 1 when it enters. Scry 2. Okay, so actually we have a 3.4 on our hands here. I'm not going to rate every card. I think the 10 cards rated people have had a week of bad audio, so maybe they're in for some ratings. You know, maybe they're just hungry for it. But yeah, okay, so 2 mana enters Scry 2. I will take this ETB trigger, but I actually still don't think that it's like that powerful. I'm so, like, what deck is playing this card, right? I think in limited, it's okay. Gets your kind of vehicle theme on point quickly. You know, a 2-drop vehicle is something that some decks can take advantage of. Crew 1, the pilots in the set can crew it pretty easily. Anything in the set can crew it pretty easily, except for the blue 2-drop that's a 0-4, like that guy. But, you know, apart from that, it's a decent little package, but it will not see much play outside of limited. I do think it might be a decent card there. Get prepared, by the way, for Ask the Audiences tonight. So just be on your toes, Twitch chat. You get to be involved in YouTube history. But let's go ahead and move on to the next common, because even though I don't think this guy's horrible, I just don't think there's like much to say about it. So let's look at Wreck Remover next. This is 4 mana for a 3/4 artifact creature. It's construct. It has cycling 2, and whenever it enters or attacks, exile up to 1 target card from a yard. You gain 1 life. So little guy does kind of a lot of things. Again, I think kind of a limited, like all-star, like a little bit for a common. He does so much. He's better than a hill giant. Any deck can play him, right? He's got 4 toughness. That's kind of important. Has an enter trigger and an attacks trigger that actually might matter here and there on certain cards. The gain life trigger is kind of neat. And if none of this is important to you, he also benefits the cycling theme. So altogether, you know, he crews most vehicles in the set because a lot of vehicles stop at crew 3 from what we've seen so far. So again, like decent little limited card. Any deck can play it. Stats are fine. You know, enters trigger does a thing. So I can't really hate on this little guy. Again, kind of locked into limited, but solid. Definition of solid, but all right. Pedal to the Metal is up next. That's what this card is. I've looked at the trailer a lot because I've already remixed the trailer. I just haven't released the remix for various reasons. But it's this little guy. I've seen this little guy's face like a million times because he's in the trailer. But here's what the card actually does. Pedal to the Metal is X and a red for an instant. Target creature gets +X/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. So it's a Howl from Beyond that gives the creature first strike. In red, again, you know, mostly locked into limited nowadays, although Howl from Beyond was a card we used to play. You know, I feel like if you have enough mana, you know, suddenly your Monastery Mint or your Monastery Swift Spear or your Slick Shot gets through for, God, how much damage? You know what I mean? If this X equals 3, that's an extra 5 damage, you know? But you could do the same thing with a Monstrous Rage for a single mana, you know? I'm just not sure how great it is, but Howl from Beyond was a hell of a drug back in the day, but you know, we're a far howl now from 1996. I'm just not sure cards like this are still great. You know what I mean? Tyvar's Stand is a version of this effect in Standard that honestly doesn't really see much play anymore, but is a decent Magic card, and I think it just blows stuff like this out of the water. But fun little combat trick, you know? Instead of reprinting like Sure Strike or a card like it for limited, they just printed this thing that's like, just however much mana you have. So that might be pretty decent, like limited aggro decks is a one of. But we'll move on to Goblin Surveyor. I actually kind of like this. This is 3 mana. As a matter of fact, I think this is probably the best common of the day. But there's only one more to look at after this. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/2 Goblin Scout with Trample. Start your engines, and once you have max speed, you can pay 3 and exile this thing from your graveyard to draw a card. So kind of a, whatever that little Fairy Dream Thief, right? A little surveilling fairy 1-drop in black right now in Standard. But like Fairy Dream Thief that you kind of have to like there's extra steps, and it costs 3 times as much to actually cast as a Fairy Dream Thief and doesn't have like real evasion. It's just like, again, we got a limited locked card here, just like I think all of our commons today. But this is not a terrible max speed ability, right? Like, you don't have to wait and sit on the battlefield and it doesn't do anything until max speed hits, right? In this case, even if it's super late in the game when you hit max speed, this has some sort of value, even if it died super early. So, you know, I kind of don't hate it. It's a 3 mana 3/2, a stat line that I'm not a big fan of because it dies to a lot of 2-drops in combat in limited. But it does have the trample, and if it does die in combat, it converts into a card later. So, like, you know, better than a lot of 3 mana 3/2s. But again, when compared to a card like Fairy Dream Thief, you get the feeling that this is probably not standard playable. So I yawn and move on. Let's get to Brightfield Mustang here. This is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 3/3 horse mount with saddle 1. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, untap it, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So Hill Giant stats, but the moment it attacks, and it's like super easy to saddle it too. The moment it attacks, it's 4/4. And it's 5/5 and 6/6, and it's kind of got like pseudo vigilance, which is okay, especially since it's getting bigger, right? The larger a creature gets, the better vigilance tends to be, you know, so there's all that. Overall, I think it's a decent little common for the saddle decks or the mount decks in limited, but that's about as far as this goes, and that's about as far as most of the commons go today. Again, I think this is the most powerful one, Goblin Surveyor, just because of this max speed ability. The creature doesn't even ever have to be in play for you to utilize the ability, right? You just mill it into your yard and then draw a card later, but we just have better things that do that in standard, right? So I don't think it's going anywhere. That said, let's move on to the uncommons, if you guys are ready. I think that the uncommons are kind of half and half today. I'm trying to get into position. Are we in position? I have no idea. So about like 5 of the uncommons. I'd say there's a total of 10 cards today, including the commons, that aren't super impressive. So the first half of the uncommons are not amazing, but the second half is where we get into some like really bananas stuff. So let's get through these. Canyon Vaulter could have totally been a common. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 3/1 core pilot. Whenever this creature saddles a mount or crews a vehicle during your main phase, that mount or vehicle gains flying until end of turn. Okay, so this guy won't gain flying, right? I guess it doesn't need to because it's tapped, you know what I mean? But still, it's kind of weird. I guess the flavor is still like he's riding it, so it gains flying. One way or the other, that's more time than I really wanted to spend on this card already. It's just a 2 mana 3/1, so it crews a lot of the stuff in the set. Should be set again. And giving certain vehicles flying is probably pretty good. So signposty sort of, you know, cheap uncommon that isn't embarrassing in terms of stats for, again, the limited like mount or vehicle deck. And I think that there's more than one vehicle deck in limited. There's more than one mount deck in limited. It can be green white, it can be red white, it can be all 3. So this thing kind of meets at the crossroads of all of those. It could be okay for that format. But Autarch Mammoth is up next. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 green for a 5/5 elephant mount. When this creature enters and whenever it attacks while saddled, create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. And it saddles for freaking 5, which is so much. But you do get a 3/3 when it ETBs. And so that's 6 mana for 8 total P and T. Don't forget the T on 2 bodies, and that's okay. I think by the time you get to 6 mana, I'm not sure how good the extra 3/3 is going to be, but you know, still, it's a fair amount of raw power toughness on 1 card. And if you can get it saddled up like somehow, then it's creating even more PT for you. Maybe that matters. Interesting that it makes a 3/3. Again, that can crew anything in the set. Works well in multiples when you think about it, because one can crew the other, you know, saddle the other. So there's cool things about the card, but again, mostly kind of a would-be game breaker in limited, but I don't even think it does that. So we'll see. You know, if you can reliably saddle it, maybe having a creature factory like this that attacks for 5 every turn is intimidating in limited. But I actually think this format's going to be pretty fast. So I don't trust it. You know what I mean? Right in the trash. That's good. That's probably the best way to put it, right? So let's move on to Unswerving Sloth. We got a sloth over here. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 white for a 5/5 sloth mount with saddle 4. That is also a fat saddle. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, it gains indestructible until end of turn. Untap all creatures you control. So that allows you to send the team in. It's got pseudo vigilance. This is a little bit more like it. in terms of, this card I think is much better when compared to the Mammoth. Even though in sealed especially, a creature factory will win you the game. But what else will win you the game is an indestructible when attacking 5/5 that also, stays up to block next turn, and this does that. Also, it untaps the creature that saddled it. So, yeah, it's got saddle 4, but now your 4-drop or your 4-power creature can block as well. So, I don't know. Neat. If you're saddling or crewing other stuff, those creatures untap as well and get back on D. So, decent offense, not an embarrassing stat to mana cost ratio in limited, even if none of its abilities are live. It's still a 5-mana 5/5, and that is beyond rate for the most part, in limited. So, I don't hate this for that format. But also, obviously, that's more or less about as far as it goes. Up next is Marshall's Path Cruiser. I actually brought this card up just a little before I went into YouTube mode here. This is 3 mana for a 6/5 vehicle with Crew 5, another Crew 5. Whenever this vehicle enters, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle that library. Also has Exhaust for Wooburg, a white, a blue, a black, a red, and a green. This vehicle becomes an artifact creature forever. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So, hey, get a little 8/7 vehicle forever. You never have to crew it again. So the crew cost is high. But what if it were just a huge dude and you didn't forever and you never actually had to crew it? That'd be cool, but you're spending a total of 8 mana and it's really hard to get Wooburg some of the time. Although I guess the card does help you get it. This is neat. I kind of like the ETB value, but in the end, I'm not sure that it actually goes anywhere. Cool little uncommon, though. We're obviously starting to, we're not even in second gear yet, but we're hitting the revs for it. We'll shift soon, I promise you. I do think this is actually very decent limited, especially if you can hit the exhaust ability. But even if you cannot hit the exhaust ability, I don't think this is terrible. I think you're going to have a hard time crewing it on turn 3 unless you get specifically Hazaret on turn 2. She's a 5-power 2-drop. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit difficult, right? But, as far as crewing it starting turn 4, I think that that's not too much to ask in most situations. Even in limited, I think you could probably pull that off. But again, here, it's not the crewing. It's the fact that you have a potentially large creature, yes, that has this particular ETB trigger. This guarantees your 4-drop in sealed. That can be important. So, I don't know. I just think it's a neat little card. Again, probably, but I have to start using the word probably, not playable in standard. I think there was a time where a value card like this would have been considerable, but I think we're probably past that time at this point. But let's take a look at Cloudspire Captain. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/3 human pilot. Mounts and vehicles you control get +1/+1. This creature saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. Okay, so it's okay. Like I said, we're starting to get there. This will probably go in all of the mounts/vehicles decks in standard while people are starting to build them. But I'm not sure it actually stays in those decks. It can crew 4, which I guess kind of matters, especially since we just saw that 5-drop 5/5 that crews 4 a couple of cards ago. So this can, saddle that. That's kind of neat. But one way or the other, just the Anthem effect, I think, is what people will find powerful about this. But I would say the best and most streamlined vehicles will probably not end up playing too many copies of this guy. It costs 3 mana. It can be cut down. All right, so that's not a very good mana investment. It can also be like nowhere to run. Like it just gets hit by all the removal. It can be hit by Torch the Tower's bargain ability and any sort of lightning strike effects. I'm not too sold on any like 3 mana Anthem effect on a creature that dies so easily. I've been burned in like 3 different decks: pirates, goblins. These are decks with 3 mana Anthem effects, and elves even to an extent, and you just get like crushed by all the removal in standard. So I just don't trust it, but I want to try it, right? Mountain Vehicles decks have been begging for pieces ever since the Cowboy set, and they're getting them in this set, so we'll see, like, kind of what stays and what goes. And ultimately, I'm fairly certain this goes, but it will be a thing people try. But with that said, I think we're into now, officially, the good uncommons of the day. This is where things will dramatically shift, everybody. Our third gear is pretty powerful, it turns out. Very, very wide power band here. So let's go ahead and get into it. with the caveat that these next maybe 5 uncommons are in no particular order, because I think that all of these are very, very good. Starting with Momentum Breaker, I think this is just a strict upgrade to Tithing Blade in the Nurturing Pixie decks, and that's going to matter, right? This is 2 mana, 1 and a black, for an enchantment with Start Your Engines. When this enchantment enters, each opponent sacrifices a creature or vehicle of their choice. Each opponent who can't do that discards a card. All right. You can pay 2 mana and sacrifice this thing to gain life equal to your speed. All right. So we are talking at this point. When compared to Tithing Blade, which is not a card that every Esper Pixie deck plays, or even all of its variants, right? Some of them play the 1/2 of Tithing Blade, some play 0 Tithing Blade. But with a card like this around, I think that you might start seeing this effect creep into those decks a little bit more often. This can be picked up just like a Tithing Blade. Nurturing Pixie, Fear of Isolation can pick this card up, but it will also proc your like Optimistic Scavenger and like any other eerie effects you might have in that deck, but it's usually just Optimistic Scavenger. But again, this will proc it, and Tithing Blade won't. So that's a huge difference. Plus, Tithing Blade does not make them discard a card. You have to actually like wait for them to have a thing to sacrifice if you really want a Tithing Blade for all the value. But in this case, even if you're not playing against a creature or vehicle-based deck, the card still has real value, and a bunch of other cards in your deck make them discard, right? Like sometimes you'll see a Bandit's Talent or 2 in the deck, which this might take the place of, but you always see Hopeless Nightmare in there. And on that same train of thought, Hopeless Nightmare is a card that makes them lose life pretty consistently. Even if you can't get in, attack damage in Esper Pixie, you are often making them lose life to Hopeless Nightmare at a rate of like once every couple of turns. So that will increase your speed as well. If you have to, right, if you're trying to race your opponent, this will gain you, anywhere between 1 and 4 life. Not the worst thing in the world, but just being an enchantment that procs eerie effects and being a pick-upable card for a deck like that, I think really goes a long way towards this thing's playability. I think we're looking at a standard playable card now. So, yeah, it never misses. There's no miss mode on this thing. And honestly, later on in the game, better than a food token, Like, this will sometimes equal a food token, right? 2 mana sack, it gain 3, but sometimes it's better than that. Gain 4 life is kind of no joke if you are racing, and sometimes Nurturing Pixie is. So, and not to mention that Pixie, it's got, I've already said this once this season, but bears repeating, when you see cards like this, like, Pixie already has Fear of Isolation and obviously Nurturing Pixie. So apart from Hopeless Nightmare, they have these like cheap, evasive creatures that hit the table like really early in the game, and those will deal damage to your opponent reliably too. So like, it might be easy to get to max speed in a deck like this, or in a deck like that. So I like it, and this is one of those cards where max speed is not important, and I think that the Start Your Engines cards actually kind of get better when the max speed is not like that big of a deal. You know what I mean? So good. I think it's actually a very, very good Magic card in a lot of ways. So look out for it at your local arena. We got Molt Tender coming up next, though. This is a single green mana for a 1/1 Insect Druid. It taps to mill a card. Okay. It also taps and exiles a card from your graveyard to add 1 mana of any color. Everybody. It's pretty good. I mean, I know that's like crackpot analysis right there. You know what I mean? Like, nailed it, Dev. But yeah, that's all right. I guess it's pretty good. Obviously, an Insidious Roots. Everybody shout Insidious Roots from the rafters, because this makes creatures with Insidious Roots when you exile the cards from your yard, obviously, but it fuels the roots as well with the mill. I guess maybe Delirium decks, that want to mill cards. Anything that wants to mill cards. Tap to mill a card is not the worst thing in the world. And obviously it fuels itself. The first turn it taps to mill a card. The second turn it removes that card. That's kind of neat. So this is not, Birds of Paradise or anything. It's not even Llanowar Elves, but it's fairly easy for on turn 2, really, for this guy to just have like all the cards in the world to exile from your yard. Just play them on turn 1, and then turn 2, some sort of, even if it costs both mana that you have available, you can do like Picklock Pranksters, Adventure Half, and mill yourself 4 cards. Well, now you have 4 cards in your yard on turn 2. So if you have a 1-drop play in your hand, you can tap this guy, exile a card, Helping Hand. You know what I mean? Like that's oh my God, actually, that seems crazy. There's a lot of colors involved in that. You have to have green mana on turn 1 in your Helping Hand deck, but oh my God, it does work that way. Turn 1, this guy. Turn 2, Picklock Prankster. Exile a card from your yard. Cast Helping Hand, Aborenaculus. Gross. So there's a line if you want to do that. But there's just obviously other stuff this guy does outside of that, and roots and whatever. Very easy to have cards in your yard in this environment. Very fast. Even if you're just casting, removing, cast Go for the Throat. Now I can make mana. Even that is kind of like baseline, but it's really, really good. If you play this guy, let's say you play this guy on 1, and then on turn 2 you cast Cut Down. You still have 2 mana available. That's great. You remove your opponent's 1 or 2 drop, and you get to play your own 2 drop. Nuts. That's actually nuts in terms of tempo. So, guy's crazy. I actually think this dude's like wild. You know what I'm saying? No Birds of Paradise, but it taps to mill a cards. Birds of Paradise doesn't do that, does it? So, gotcha. Yeah, this thing's playable Magic card. Can we agree? I think we can. You bop it home, maybe. But bop. And also, before I move on from here, you know what deck wants to put cards in its yard, and it also wants to make blue mana, but it hates having to do that? Lurgoyf. Urborg Lurgoyf, right? It wants to be a green-black deck, but it's got Urborg Lurgoyf, which has a blue kicker cost in it. It's got Cruel Somnophage, which has a blue adventure half on it, right? So that deck hates having to include blue mana like so much. But this little dude right here is like a land that counts as a creature in your graveyard. That's important for those decks, right? It increases the power toughness of your Lurgoyfs. But at the same time, also makes that blue mana for you when you need it. I like him. I like the guy. Guys, okay, Deathrong Shaman. Yeah, I guess I hadn't compared him to Deathrite yet, which is probably for the best. Definitely not Deathrite Shaman either, but like, he's as close as we're going to get, But we'll move on to Intimidation Tactics. This is probably the weakest of these strong uncommons we've looked at so far, but I still really like it. A single black mana for a sorcery with cycling 3. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose an artifact or creature card from it. Exile that card. It's a fuzzy image, but I don't see a period after exile that card, which is kind of throwing me off. But anyway, man, this is fine. All right, yeah, I like that exile, baby. This is like a Dreams of Steel and Oil that doesn't hit graveyards. Dreams does, and I think that's actually pretty important in this format where, like, in the arena, every, 5th deck is a Reanimator deck, so, Dreams of Steel and Oil is pretty good against them. But at the same time, there's going to be more artifacts in this standard, I think, after this set comes out, just because of the sheer number of vehicles. And a few of them are pretty playable looking. But I like a discard effect that cycles. I think it's pretty good. You draw this off the top in the late game. Your opponent's, gassed out on cards. Still just draws a card, which is something the discard decks want to do. They want to outcard their opponent once both decks are in top deck mode. Super important for that. Right now, they sometimes use Ruthless Negotiation, which I don't think is actually a super powerful Magic card. This is probably not either, but that exile effect is incredible. I do like the word exile on this. And again, I think that the sort of top deck mode on it, when you're both trying to establish card advantage late in the game, which is always what happens when you're a discard deck. You run your opponent out of cards, but most of your effects are 1-for-1s. So you're out of cards too. So now Bandit's Talent is helping you outcard them, right? And this is another thing that kind of helps you do that. Blow through cards and find the right ones, your important creatures. So I kind of like it. I like the cut of its hair. It looks all right. We'll move on. Yeah, the cycling is always good. Cycling is still, to this day, underrated. You're absolutely right. Next is Grease Wrench Goblin here. A single red mana for a 2/1 Goblin Artificer with Exhaust. For 2 and a red mana, you discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many cards. Put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So 3 mana to sort of cast like a Faithless Looting. It's kind of neat that you can do this at any time, It doesn't say Exhaust is sorcery speed or anything, so do it during your opponent's combat step or EOT if you've just got mana spare, left over or whatever. You can do it, before it dies. You can do it in response to, direct damage effects and stuff like that. So altogether a neat ability. The most important thing about this is that it is a Savannah Lions with the Goblin type, which you really don't see a whole lot of. These 1 mana 2 power goblins are somewhat uncommon. So that's kind of neat for just the Goblin deck in general. And the Goblin deck wants to draw and discard cards. Also kind of interesting for the Agatha's Soul Cauldron deck, because this can put a +1/+1 counter on itself, and then it has all the activated abilities locked up in the Cauldron. But apart from that, it has an activated ability. Exhaust is an activated ability. So once it's in your graveyard, all your guys that already have +1/+1 counters now also have this ability. And being able to like filter through cards like this in the Soul Cauldron deck like could be important. And if nothing else, it's a pretty aggressive, like non-embarrassing turn 1 play to go ahead and get some chip damage in. Or like trade with an early creature. Like altogether, it's a decent package. It really is. Like both for Goblins decks and maybe even for Soul Cauldron, which is obviously picking up some pieces in a set that cares about activated abilities. So I think this is actually really good. Oh my God. Mordobus. Oh crap. I think I just threw my back out. Everybody spirit bomb some energy to Mordobus. Did you really? Oh my God. Are you okay? Let's stop the whole video just to make sure Mordobus is okay. I'm sorry, buddy. I love you. I don't know if that helps, but we're looking at some cool Magic cards. Again, these are some cards. I was saying this at the top of the stream too. You know, sometimes, regardless of how much you don't like a set or its themes, you got to look past that and recognize like a good Magic card when you see it. And I think this is a pretty decent one, man. So are the last few we've looked at. But next is Defend the Rider, a card that more than any pilot or mount or vehicle in the set so far is probably, you know, a card that will help make those decks strong in Standard, right? This is a single green mana for an instant. Choose one. Target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. You can also, if you'd rather, create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token that saddles and mounts and crews and blah, 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 as though its power were 2 greater. One of those little pilot guys from the set. So this note, I want you to note a word on this card that's easy to miss. Permanent. Target permanent you control. It doesn't have to be a creature in this case. That is most likely because they know you want to target your vehicles some of the time. And rather than just putting like target artifact or creature you control, they were like, screw it, permanent. So this protects your planeswalkers. This protects your enchantments. That's kind of important. And if you're not even playing vehicles in your deck, sometimes like make a 1/1, you know what I mean? Like end of turn, make a 1/1, make a surprise blocking 1/1, you know, that's a mode that you'll play. You know, it's not a mode that you should ignore is all I'll say. A flash 1/1. Can be useful for all kinds of reasons. But obviously the save your guy mode on this is, you know, baseline sort of for 1 green mana. This is kind of what we expect. But again, it's the word permanent. The word permanent is really intriguing on this card. And I think makes it pretty playable in comparison to like certain other cards, dude. It can even in fact protect a boat. It can protect a subterranean schooner or the belligerent. It can protect a boat. It could even be one. But yeah, hexproof and indestructible are the 2 things you're looking for. That basically covers all the bases. You know what I mean? But apart from that, again, making a pilot is good. And even if your deck, you know, if your deck incidentally includes, you know, like 4 copies of a powerful vehicle or 6 copies of powerful vehicles, then this card can be, you know, good for that purpose too. It's just altogether, I think this is pretty phenomenal and has a wider use than it appears. Right, you just look at this and you're like, oh, mounts and vehicles deck. And yes, in that deck, it's a banger, dude. But, you know, even apart from that deck, I think this card has apps. So, like it. Yeah, I can protect an island. Yes, you can. Final uncommon of the day is far from the most powerful uncommon of the day, and I definitely have my problems with it. But I also find this to be like the most interesting uncommon of the day, so it gets the slot. 3 mana for Ether Siphon. This costs 1 and 2 blue for an artifact with Start Your Engines. You can pay 2 and tap it to draw a card. Once you get to max speed, whenever you draw a card, each opponent mills 2 cards. Okay, so pretty good, right? Well, intriguing, right? Interesting card, but how do you make them lose life in your mill deck? You know, that's a little tough. It specifically doesn't work with whatever that thing's called, the Mind Breaker or the Mind Reaver. I played it on stream. It's a 3 mana, it costs 3 blue for like a 10/1, right? But the way that card is worded, your creatures no longer actually deal combat damage to your opponent. They instead mill. So you're not going to increase your speed if you have that guy out. So it's kind of at odds with that, dude. But beyond that, again, the real problem to solve here is like, how do I make my opponent lose life in my mill deck, at least reliably? So that's an issue. It's kind of a problem. Mind Slicer, thank you very much. Thank you, Darth Vash. Yeah, I think it's a trap. I think it's a trap too. But as another chatter here has just pointed out, I was about to say this, Axe Crowned. It is just like 2 tap draw card. That's that's worse. I've seen worse. It's like better than a JM Tome, which is a card from 1993, but so is Black Lotus. But like a JM Tome is 4 mana to play, 4 mana to tap and draw a card. This is less to play, less to tap and draw. I don't know. Like 2 tap draw a card is actually kind of all right a little bit. Like, compared to Maze Mind Tome. Tome is probably the better card. Probably, because it's cheaper to play in the first place. Any deck can play it. But at the cost of 1 single mana more than a Maze Mind Tome, you get to draw cards forever. So, I don't know. Like, maybe if there's a Prodigal Sorcerer reprint in this set, we'll work that in somehow. But ultimately, I'm just not, like, super sure the card is that playable. But maybe in Commander, this thing sees some play, because it's another wacky like mill effect that I think is probably easier to set up in that format. But we're going to be trying it. We're going to be trying it on stream. There's other ways to mill your opponent. So I wish it was an enchantment. That's another thing that sucks. I wish it was an enchantment. If it were an enchantment, it would trigger the crab, the 1-drop crab from Dustmore, and they're like mills your opponent too whenever you Eerie, right? But it doesn't even do that. So it's just like at odds with all the premier mill cards in Standard on purpose, right? So I have my problems, but I respect it. End of the day, I respect it, but we will move on officially to the rares. I think the first couple of rares are less interesting than some of the powerful uncommons from today, but there were good cards from today. We've already seen a few, so don't mistake it. We'll move on to Possession Engine, which I've actually kind of grown on since I put it in this slot. We'll discuss. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 blue for a 5/5 vehicle with crew 3. When it enters, gain control of target creature an opponent controls for as long as you control this vehicle. Okay. That creature can't attack or block for as long as you control this vehicle. Okay. So it's useless, right? Well, no. Of course, you could always grab like a Sheldred. Right, and that's something that has an effect on the game. There's plenty of things that have an effect on the game you could grab that don't have to attack or block. Here's the deal, though. Here's what kind of turned me around on this card, is the thinking that, like, almost no matter what you grab, this is an upgrade. You know what I mean? Like, let's say I do grab a Sheldred. Well, this is a 5/5. Sheldred's a 4/5. So I can just use the Sheldred to crew this guy, and it's like I stole a creature better than a Sheldred. Huh? That's some. I don't know. Like, not everything you want to steal crews this. I steal like Bloodletter of Aclazotz, or I steal Unstoppable Slasher. Those don't crew this, which sucks. But, if I steal the 6/6 demon from an Unholy Annex, yeah, technically I could have a 6/6 flyer instead of a 5/5 with no keywords, but I still have a 5/5 attacker, and the 6/6 can crew it. So I don't know. I think that a lot of the time you'll be upgrading the power toughness of the creature that you stole anyway, so that's cool. And even when you're not upgrading it, it's still, it's still 5/5. So I don't hate this. I really don't. And, even if you don't want, let's say, your opponent has a removal spell, you know what I mean? So you don't want to run this into combat. You don't have to. Just, put their creature in your pocket, and that's it. It's not attacking you, so I guess that's good. I can't hate this. I like control magic effects, and it's going to be reasonably difficult to remove this, right? Because it's above, it's an artifact creature, so no go for the throat. It's above cut down. It's above anoint with affliction. It's above nowhere to run. Just all the played black removal spells. Can't really do jack about this thing. And even most things like, they have Get Lost. Well, just don't turn it into a creature ever. it's going to sit there while you hang out with their Biza for whatever reason. You know what I mean? Just so they can't attack you with it. So I don't know. I think that it's okay. I can't think of a deck that'll play it. That's my other issue with this thing, is I can't really think of a deck that plays this card, but just in a vacuum, I'd have to give this card like a 4.8. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like that bad, really. I kind of like it. It's not bad. So let's move on. Just wanted to see what you guys were saying. Like, copying this is great. Yeah, copying this is pretty sick. Copying this is very good. I'll say that much. You has point. We'll move on to Thopter Fabricator. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a Mischievous Mystics. This one is a 4/4 flyer with crew 2. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Okay, so I don't think this makes Mischievous Mystic a deck, but it is cool to have, copies. I was going to say copies 5 through 8 of Mystic, but really, I'd say Mystic is copies 5 through 8 of this now. Mystic does have that it's 2 mana. It goes 2 mana to get that card down, and you want a card like that to be as cheap as possible. Meanwhile, you probably don't want to curve Mystic into this either, right? Because you didn't make a guy with Mystic on like probably the only turn you're going to get a chance to do that. So there are some issues with something like this, but just like sometimes you don't play Mystic until you have Opt Up, something like that, right? Then you probably might not play Thopter Fabricator until you have Opt Up, or, you know, again, a card like it. 1 mana draw effect. This, unlike Mischievous Mystic, has all the same properties of the artifact creature I was just talking about, right? Like this can't be cut down, this can't be Go for the Throated, this can't be Nowhere to Run, this can't be, well, it can be Anoint with Affliction, but not if you never crew it because it's not a creature, right? So this has all that going for it in terms of like what can and cannot remove it, right? Get Lost can't remove it if you don't crew it. And with a card like this, this is an effect that really can just like kind of sit on the table, you know, and be a threat in and of itself without attacking or blocking. That said, if you can attack or block with it, it is a 3 mana 4/4 flyer, which I hear is a good deal. So, you know, the big problem with this, I think I have to point it out, is that one of its tokens cannot crew it. But, you know, 2 of its tokens can, and like most creatures can, you know, so shouldn't be too much of a problem. Interestingly, and I think noteworthy too, Mischievous Mystic crews it. And you don't often attack with Mischievous Mystic. So being able to crew this with it is, you know, something to point out. Altogether, neat card, but even a card like this, I have to say, sadly, I don't think it has the power level to like really break into Standard with where we are at the moment in Standard. But this is a really super fun card that I'm going to be building decks with. And we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Because I do think it's a super tempting ability. And I think it's so much less removable than anything else like it in Standard. Not just Mystic, but, you know, even stuff like Gremlin Tamer and Third Path Iconoclast. You know, these 2 drops that make guys just get blown off the table. But this dude is a lot harder to remove. And I think that might make like all the difference. So, kind of like him. He also triggers on your opponent's turn if you draw 2. Just a lot of good stuff on this dude. But let's move on to Curse Cloth Wrappings here. This I might throw to the audience for a second. I want to know how you feel. I also want to know what love is, and I want you to show me. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for an artifact. Zombies you control get +1/+1. All right, you can also tap it to have target creature card in your graveyard get Embalm until end of turn. Embalm cost is now equal to the mana cost. So in case you don't remember Embalm, it's one of the sort of special guest returning mechanics from Amonkhet. Exile the card from your graveyard, pay its Embalm cost, which in this case again is its casting cost, to create a token that is a copy of it, except it's a white zombie. It's a Rob zombie in addition to its other types and has no mana cost. Embalm only as a sorcery. So you got sorcery speed, reanimation ability that makes you, pay the card's mana cost again. I compared this to Conduit of Worlds. It allows you, it's a 4 mana green artifact with similar casting cost, 2 green instead of 2 black. Allows you to play lands out of your graveyard. You can tap it once a turn to play any permanent out of your graveyard. And this is, I think, worse than that card, which doesn't see play, but probably should see one of play in like Golgari midrange. I've been kind of soapboxing for Conduit of Worlds lately. I actually think it's pretty good. But I do think that there are tempting ideas with this, right? It doesn't just work with zombies, first of all, the obvious to point out here is that whatever creatures you embalm with it will now be zombies, so they will get +1/+1. So that's kind of neat, Embalm a guy, gets a little anthem. But obviously you want it in your zombie deck, but just a 4 mana zombie anthem is not good, that's not good enough in and of itself, but it is something you want to point out about the card. The idea here is that this, as like a one of, I think, in like certain mono black decks, could get back your Bloodletter of Aclazotz or your Unstoppable Slasher to help you assemble a combo again, if that's what you're doing. This could even go in like a Raise the Past deck, although I think that deck is probably not interested in this card, but it could help you keep important creatures in play, right? Starscape Cleric, Hinterland Sanctifier, Elisil Core, whatever you're looking for. And that deck always wants, to fish out of its graveyard. So I don't know. I think that there are certain combo-ish decks that want to be able to keep pieces in place, and this could help them reliably do that. It's not just a Reanimator spell, right? It's a delayed Reanimator spell. You'll almost never be able to use it the turn that you play it, right? So there's that, but you can use it more than once. Not on the same creature, but you can use it more than once, and I think that that's somewhat noteworthy once it's locked in place. It's kind of hard to remove without the presence of like a braid, you know what I mean? Although I guess like Into the Flood Maw could just bounce it. You feel really bad about that. So like watch out for certain plays. Like this town ain't big enough, just bouncing it is a super feel bad in terms of mana value spent. So there are plays that just demolish it in standard. I won't pretend there aren't. But still, it is tempting. At the end of all of that, it is tempting to have a card in play that you untap all your lands and you just have it. It lets you play cards out of your yard. That seems like it would be. Look at it from the other side of the table, right? Look. Think about how it would be to play against this card once your opponent has untapped mana. It would probably be, half the time you're just looking for the removal spell, right? Like I got to get the removal spell for that guy, or I'm dead. And if they just have this locked into place, then that seems hopeless, doesn't it? Not terrible. You limited bomb, turns Glissa into a 4/4. Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good point, though. Imagine just getting, and I've already pointed out, like, combo creatures that Golgari plays, Unstoppable Slasher, sometimes Bloodletter of Aclazotz. But yeah, Glissa, Sheldred. Imagine getting any of them back. It's kind of nuts, dude. So, I don't know, man. I don't know, just in terms of like a silver bullet in like a Golgari or Orzhov mid-range deck of some kind, like I could see this working out, but ultimately I just can't really bring myself to say it makes the cut. You know what I mean? So what would you guys say? What would you rate this card? And then I'll rate the card, having probably spoiled any chance at getting like a good rating. You really shouldn't, give your entire opinion before you're like, okay, what do you guys think? So chat, help me rate this card because I want to know sort of where you guys are on this. And if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to go in the comments. Let me know how you feel about Curse Cloth Wrappings, because this is probably the card today that I am most on the fence about in terms of true playability. I think I said it all with the Conduit of Worlds comparison, right? Conduit of Worlds isn't good enough for the most part, so I'm not sure that this will be either. But again, man, it is extremely tempting to be able to just untap and get your 3, 4, 5 drop back every turn, multiple times in a game. And just, okay, again, maybe Commander playable sort of card here, but in Standard, I would probably give this. Again, if I was rating this for 10 cards rated, we rate for Casual Commander. And for Casual Commander, I'd probably give this like a 5.2. Somewhere along there, especially in your Zombies deck, right? But if we're looking at just Standard and other like 60 card 1v1 environments, this is probably more along the lines of like a 4.2. Somewhere in there, 4.25, you know what I mean? So let me see what you guys said, because a bunch of you rated. Okay, we got a 5.9, we got a 6.5, we got a 4 out of 10, we got a 2.9 out of 10, 6.5 again, we got a 5.5, we got a 4 out of 4, we got a 5, 3.2 in constructed, 7 in sealed limited. Yeah, in sealed this is busted. 4 out of 10, we got a B, a rating of a B, a 5.4. So yeah, a pretty good span of ratings here, rating from somewhere between 4 and 5.5. I think is like the average of chat's ratings. So you guys are more or less in line with me. I'm low 4s as part of the standard rate, as far as the standard rating goes here. So I'm interested to see like if the YouTube comment section says anything too. I want to aggregate all these ratings because I don't think the card is actually as useful as I want it to be, and that's like bumming me out a little bit. But altogether, I like reanimating things. Let's move on to what I think is the last rare of the day here. It is Mindspring Merfolk. Probably the most talked about card of the day. This is a single blue mana for a 1/1 Merfolk wizard. You can exhaust this by paying X into blue and tapping it. Draw X cards. Put a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk you control. Now, let me just say, I don't think you have to have any fish out for this to be really good. Like, I don't think you have to have any other fish in your deck for this card to be good. But notably, just before we get off the fish here, this is a 1-drop for Merfolk, and they don't have a whole lot of good 1-drops in Standard. As it is, this is just a Merfolk of the Pearl Trident for the Merfolk deck. It's just a 1-mana 1/1. 4 turns out of 5. I would say this is just a crappy little 1/1. But Merfolk does need 1-drops. And now it has this. It has, Hexcatcher Mage or whatever it's called, the 2-drop that gives all your Merfolk +1/+1, has flash. Now you can sack Merfolk to counter spells, that thing. Tishana's Tidebinder is a pretty obvious 3-drop for the deck, right? So you could play Fish, and this could put more than just a counter on this guy. But looking at it from the other side, if the only Merfolk in your entire deck is this guy, then you're still getting like a 1-drop 2/2. Out of the deal eventually. You had to pay a lot of mana for it. Probably. But theoretically, you can only pay 2 mana. If you just need a +1/+1 counter on this guy right now, you could just pay 2 mana, X = 0, and get a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk, which is actually another mode on the card that I hadn't really thought of until this very moment. And it's an instant speed, too. You only get to do it once, but you can do it on your opponent's turn. EOT, combat step, whatever. +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk is actually sick at this speed. But obviously, I think, if X = even 2, right? You pay 4 mana for this to draw 2. I think that's pretty good. I think that's okay, dude. I think obviously you want X to equal 3 or 4, right? And that's great. But there's kind of a push-pull, a tension to this card. Because the moment you play your 4th untapped mana, if you see a clear line, right, if you can spend all your mana right now, then you should, I would say. You can do it at the end of your opponent's turn. So let's say you untap and play your 4th land. You can say go. You've got removal shields up. You've got counter shields up. If your opponent doesn't give you anything better to do at that point, then you can just draw 2 and put a +1/+1 counter on this guy. EOT. That's nasty, right? Or you could reel out that you could cast out that line a little bit farther. You could just say, okay, I'll take my turn and draw my card then. Okay, I'll untap my lands and draw my card and take my turn. And then next turn, if your opponent doesn't do anything, you can draw the card. You see how there's a tension to this? Because I feel like the moment you can actually get card advantage off of it, then suddenly you're like, okay, is this what I'm spending my mana on this turn, or do I want to wait and cash it in for more cards? Of course, the tension there is that it could be removed or you could lose the game in that time period. So, fun tension on a card like this. I like that about it. But I think this card is very good. I do. I think that at the end of the day, the floor on it is a 1-mana 1/1 do nothing, and that's a super duper low floor. So we have to acknowledge that. Okay, all right. But I also don't think it's Christmas land to think of a world where your 1-drop draws you 3 cards. That could easily happen. I also think that, now obviously again, the floor is 1-mana 1/1. But if your opponent, I'd say a step up from the floor, but a very high step, okay? Watch your step as you come up or downstairs here. A very high step up from the floor is, let's say your opponent feels the need to throat goat this. You know what I mean? Go for the throat is the card I'm referring to. So let's say your opponent feels the need to go for the throat this, or anoint with affliction this. Okay. You spent 2 mana and used one of the best removal spells in your deck to kill my 1-drop that does nothing. Good trade. Good trade, dude. You know what I mean? That's not too bad. I'll take it. If you burn a cut down on my Mindspring Merfolk, that's a cut down you don't have for my 3/2 for 3 mana Tishana's Tidebinder later in the game. So you see how that works? And if you ever do get to cash it in, let's say, I think this is a situation you're going to run into a fair number of times. Let's say that you have open mana and your opponent goes to remove this. Well, I can just draw 2. I don't care if it's on its way to the graveyard. I don't care at all. They go for the throat this, and I have 3 open mana. I can draw a card. That's a good mode too. If I have 5 open mana, I draw 3. Can we go? Can we go? So I actually think this guy's kind of amazing as far as 1-drops go. Yesterday I freaked out about that red 1-drop that grows whenever you discard any number of cards. It gets that much bigger. And I kind of freaked out about that guy. I thought he was the best dude in the video. And there was somebody in the comments that was like, well, not every 1-drop that gets bigger is going to be, multi-format all-star. And it's like, first of all, just to address this, I think that guy is going to be, I think he's really, really good. Self-evidently very good. But I understand how it's very tempting to, a YouTuber says something and you just want to be like, no, I get it. There's contrarianism. It's very it fires certain, right, dopamine triggers. Anyway, I do think that guy's going to be very good, bottom line. But so if not 1-drops that get larger as the game goes on, if not those, how about a 1-drop that draws 5? How about a 1-drop that draws 3? Is that a good enough 1-drop for you? I think we're entering a phase, and not just because of this guy, right? But this guy is kind of the kicking off point for why I want to have this conversation suddenly. I think we're entering a phase where just like you have to get on board on turn 1, man. You got to do something on turn 1. We are heavily punishing tapped lands, especially if you're on the draw already in standard. Like, you do not want to play tapped land if you have 8 cards in your hand on turn 1. That spells trouble. And with stuff like this, and with the red 1-drop we saw yesterday, with the white vehicle 2/3 1-drop that we saw yesterday, and with all the 1-drops we already have access to in standard, creatures and otherwise, I think we're in a standard right now where like, you got to get on the board, baby. Let's go. You know what I mean? So if Aetherdrift is embodying that in terms of, what speed means, flavorfully, I think it's doing a good job. There's a fair number of just like turn 1 plays that are really threatening in terms of like the snowball effect. So I don't know, dude. I think this guy is very good. Even with the, sunken living room, the extremely low floor in this case. I think that the upside is high, and I don't think the upside is Christmas Land either, especially being instant speed as it is. So I like it. I saw that the professor was supposed to give their preview today, but I didn't really see who all was responsible for each individual preview. Was this the professor's preview? It should have been the Merfolk man, but fish guy, but anyway, yeah, this is almost certainly, if not the best rare of the day, like maybe even the best card of the day. Some of the uncommons were pretty good, but this, my goodness. Again, in terms of like what cards I think we'll see pop up in decks more often, I think there's uncommons from today that are more noteworthy than this, but at the same time, I do think this has a bright life ahead of it. If not standard, then again, in the dreaded C word, right? In Commander, which I think that their cards can be okay in Commander. It doesn't make me mad. It makes some people unreasonably angry, but in any case, I think that if you do want to drag EDH into this, card's probably decent there too, right? So, and one more thing. Can I give you one more thing on this? If you can somehow engineer a way to give it haste and you rip it off the top of your library, then it's a very expensive, it's like a stroke of genius, right? It's a very expensive draw 4 or something, but like you can use it that way if you can somehow give it haste. So I don't know. That's good too. But let's move on to, I think, the final card of the day, the only mythic of the day. And probably going to have to bring up the C word again here. It's March of the World Ooze. If there's a commander card today, it's probably this one. But it's cool. Everybody likes cool cards. This is 3 and 3 green for an enchantment. Creatures you control have base power and toughness 6/6 and are oozes in addition to their other types. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, you create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. But note that because of how the rules work, you're actually creating a 6/6 green elephant ooze. You see? So if they cast a spell on not your turn, really on not their turn, that's what it says, on not their turn, you get a 6/6. So in Commander, there are going to be incidental situations where somebody like, it's Sarah's turn and Jim Bob casts an instant and you get a 6/6, right? That interaction had absolutely nothing to do with you, but you, David, get a 6/6. That's pretty good, Samantha. Good job on the 6/6. So just throwing random names out there. But in any case, yeah, I kind of like that about it in Commander. But obviously the implication for like constructed formats is that you play this and you stick it. And then they basically can't play a spell on your turn for the rest of the game. So that's nice. You just get a massive dude. I think it's cute. I think it's kind of a super cute card. I kind of don't like that about it in Commander, to be honest. Was it like too powerful, Merit Leech? That idea? I don't know. I kind of like, sometimes, I like cards that, make you watch how you're interacting. Because it could, you're going to trigger something that has nothing to do with the thing you're doing. Right? I can see how that could be really irritating. But it also adds like another wrinkle to it. that I think is not altogether unentertaining. You know what I mean? We've all been there. We've all been there when like somebody at the table is like, okay, I'm going to target this with this thing. And then somebody else at the table is like, hey, I've got the trigger. And like the guy that did the original thing is like, oh crap. We've all been there. Happens every day, as a matter of fact. Like, you totally missed that, you know, that was going to trigger when you went to cast this spell. And those are some of the best moments. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. I think it's a cool card, and cool cards should exist, especially in the Mythic slot, right? Sometimes these should be for just like unserious, like maybe we'll try it in Commander cards, and you know that's what we got this time. I think some people are going to have a great deal of fun with this, and other people are going to have to, you know, go to therapy. Like some people are going to have to, like, you're going to try to pull their hair out trying to make this card work in Commander. It's like, some people are going to have the time of their lives and the luck of the devil. And then other people are going to try to resolve this 6-mana enchantment and really not get much for their trouble. But if it does resolve and they try to like disenchant it on your turn, then you get a 6/6. But I feel like that would be a silly move. They'll just wait till their turn to disenchant it. You get nothing for your 6-mana investment. So I don't know, dude. I'm just not sure. I think this whole thing's odd. But that is actually all the cards. We do have one more image, but it's Academy Ruins, and that's because this got reprinted into the Commander product today, and it was the only thing that I really felt like bringing up from the Commander product. Academy Ruins currently runs about like $20 in all of its various forms. I think you can get one from Time Spiral for like $17, which is about as cheap as it's been in a very long time. Card used to run $25 easy. But this is just a legendary land that taps for a colorless, comes into play untapped, noteworthy. You can pay 1 and a blue and tap it to put an artifact from your graveyard on top of your library. You see how good that potentially is? Yeah. This doesn't get too many reprints, and it's relatively expensive, and it's a very exciting and powerful card. So I wanted to, if I was going to point one thing out from the Commander set today, I wanted it to be this. So keep it in mind, Academy Ruins in the Commander product. This is an extremely good card. It always has been. Leads to some, you know, infinite combos too, but just in terms of, you know, pure function, it's it's a very just baseline powerful card. Yeah, it's a very strong card. Yeah, great reprint. Yeah, everybody's saying it. New art. Yeah, I like the old frames and art a little bit better, but I like that this to me in some ways denotes like still standing ruins, right? Like the original Academy Ruins, I think is under the water. Whereas this instead, like the waters have receded. You can see the sandbar and all that, where like certain parts of the climate has been like ravaged by Phyrexian invasion and stuff. Like that's kind of neat. You look like a zoomed out picture where you're usually getting a zoomed in picture of the Academy. I don't know. Altogether, it's neat. You know, it's weird to like do a side by side with Tolarian Terror, where in that art you can still see the intact entire Academy. And this is sort of the same exact angle, but zoomed out slightly, you know? And this is the ruins of said Academy. And every time I see this, I'm actually saddened slightly. But anyway, very, very cool reprint here that I think we definitely needed, and that's hard to argue. But that is actually all of the previews for tonight. But who knows if that's the truth? Let's actually go to mythicspoiler.com and go to newest spoilers and see if maybe something got printed behind my back. Nope. That appears to be everything. Sometimes Mtg Previews gets these before Mythic Spoiler does. So let's look at Aetherdrift. Oh, there is a new card. Look at that. Look at that. There is, in fact, a brand new card. Can I actually make this large enough for people watching the video to be able to see it? Is that a thing that I can... My God, that's huge. That's way too big. That's enormous. Wow, look at the difference in those zooms. That's crazy talk. That's ridiculous. All right, what's this thing actually do? What do you do? Wicker Folk Indomitable. It's a word I hate saying, and they're going to make us say it forever. Wicker Folk Indomitable is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 4/3 artifact creature Scarecrow. You may cast this card from your graveyard by paying 2 life and sacrificing an artifact or creature in addition to paying its other costs. Okay, so a 4-powered dude that allows you to sack creatures and bring it back. It does suck that you have to pay 2 life, but it is a rare creature. It's not literally rare. I mean, they don't print creatures like these often that can come back from your graveyard and can block. It doesn't come back into play tapped either. It does not. You can cast it from your yard by sacrificing an artifact or creature. Man, okay, so you can sacrifice Case of the Stash Skeleton. You can sacrifice Infestation Sage, get your little 1/1, sacrifice that, and then get this guy back. I don't know. 4 mana is probably too much, but he can't be Go for the Throated. He can't be cut down. He can be Nowhere to Run. He can't be Anoint with Affliction. Oh, that's pretty good. And even if they do, anything besides Exile. Basically anything besides Exile, you just bring him back. Ain't no big deal. This is kind of neat. Sack a Clue. Yeah, you got plenty of those in Standard, right? Sack a Clue. If your opponent has Get Lost it, that's kind of fun, actually. They sort of can't remove it with Get Lost. Because you can use, sack one of the map tokens that Get Lost gives you and just bring it back. So, what's the point? So, it, sort of is Get Lost proof. In a way, That's actually okay. There's a little bit, you sack a treasure. Yeah, there's all kinds of junk little artifacts that you can sack to this. In Standard right now, it goes pretty well with Novice Inspector and cards like that too. So let's say you have Greedy Freebooter in your deck, right? You can sacrifice the Freebooter and get a treasure. Or if you've already lost your Freebooter, you can sacrifice the treasure to play this guy again. And a 4-power guy? A 4-power guy is pretty beef, dude. It's pretty beef. It's attractive beef. I think that's actually not too bad, but I'm just not sure where it makes the cut. Aristocrats decks in general are lower curve nowadays, especially considering the only deck that can really be, considered to be Aristocrats in Standard right now is probably the Raise the Pass deck, and its casting cost, its mana curve stops at 2 for obvious reasons. It plays Raise the Pass. But I don't know. I think in Limited, this is probably okay. Interesting. You can sacrifice vehicles and stuff that you're not using. You can sacrifice pilots that maybe you made through token generation. That's kind of neat to get this guy back. I don't know. I don't hate it. I think that there was a time, there is a Standard environment this guy could be playable in. I just don't think it's this current Standard environment. But, maybe we'll try out a one of or something. Because, even in, imagine it in Golgari. You don't have a lot of stuff to sack, do you? Or do you, right? Let's say you're playing Preacher of the Schism. You have 1/1 tokens to sacrifice. Let's say you're playing Sentinel of the Nameless City. You have map tokens to sacrifice, right? Let's say you're playing Mosswood Dread Knight, and you probably are. Well, if you sack your Dread Knight to this, you get to play it as a card draw, and then play the Dread Knight again. So that's actually a fun little line, sacrificing Dread Knight to this. So I don't know. There's lines. If things get a little bit hairy with your own Archfiend to the draws, just sack your own Archfiend to bring this back. You'll never do that, but you could. I don't know. I want to like this more than I should. Let me just put it that way. We need Disciple of the Vault back. Ooh, he has to be slammed with Disciple of the Vault. Sack an artifact, ping, and then bring this back and sack it again, ping with Disciple. That'd be cute. I love Disciple of the Vault. I don't care what anybody says, dude. Disciple is my favorite part of Affinity. It's the fun part of Affinity. And Arcbound Ravager, everyone hated Arcbound Ravager. I love Ravager, dude. It's even better than Atog, and you play Atog in the deck anyway. It's funny because Affinity is a deck everyone hates, but when it comes to some of the cards in Affinity, they're my favorite cards of all. Frogmite. Oh my god, I love Frogmite. Mirror Enforcer. I love Mirror Enforcer, and these cards aren't even in the deck anymore. But Shrapnel Blast, dude, I love Shrapnel. But you talk about two mana for 5 damage at instant speed. Let's go, baby. That's crazy. Disciple of the Vault's the best Blood Artist effect ever printed as long as you're playing that deck. Affinity was, dude, Ravager especially. Ravager, it's I can't block it. And if I try to swing into it, it gets huge. And it's yeah, exactly. It's just Ravager and Disciple of the Vault damage will just kill you, out of nowhere. It's, I miss it. I'm a jerk, right? Because I constantly say I like Mill. I know you guys don't like Mill, but Mill has a right to exist and it's a fun deck, and you guys are boo. And I guess I feel the same way about Affinity. It's just there was a point during 5th Dawn Standard where I was if you can't beat them, join them. It's been long enough at this point. And you actually start playing the deck out and you're oh, I'm playing Pokemon. I'm playing Yu-Gi-Oh, right? I just get to vomit my entire hand onto the table starting on turn 1. That's a fun deck to play. Yeah, sure. Oh, you have Viridian Shaman? This guy's got Viridian Shaman. He thinks that's going to do something. You know what I mean? Affinity was so much fun, dude. Even the mirrors are fun. First one to Cranial Plating wins, right? It's usually how that match played out. First one to Skull Clamp wins for the first 6 months. But first one to cranial plating wins, and then they banned that. It's just, Affinity was great. Oh, I miss Affinity. Morning Tail, thanks for your Prime sub for 15 months. But now I got to end the YouTube portion of this because I've just spent the last 5 minutes talking about Affinity. Oh, man. That has nothing to do with Aetherdrift spoilers. But anyway, if you're watching on YouTube, thanks for making it all the way to this part of the video. And that last 5 minutes was probably effective, pretty painful. But anyway, appreciate you guys. I'll be back tomorrow with more Aetherdrift spoilers. Over the weekend, I'm going to be concentrating on 10 cards rated and getting some other stuff batched out. And then Monday, we'll be back with second week, number 2, baby, of Aetherdrift spoilers. When we come back to the stream next Thursday, that's going to be rate every card speed run. So if you're on stream right now and you haven't followed yet, go ahead and do that. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and follow on twitch.tv/SBMTGDev, because next week is going to be the thing I put myself through for your enjoyment every couple of months, where I rate every single stinking card in that set, except for maybe a couple because they haven't come out yet. I think the spoilers officially end on Friday, but there's no spoilers scheduled for Friday, which is kind of weird. So by Thursday, we should be able to rate every single card in this freaking set 1 week from as I'm recording this. So start your engines and get ready for that one, baby, because that's always fun. But apart from that, I'm donezo for this onezo, baby. So just do the stuff, hit the like button on your way out. It's the button shaped like a thumb. It's not too hard to find. It's down there. Subscribe to the sandwich if you haven't done it yet. I need more subs. We're going south on subs this last month, guys. I need some subs. Yum. Aside from that, you can check out the Patreon if you want to support this content. $1 a month to make sure we can keep the lights on around here. And apart from that, you'll be able to vote on what decks we do when we get to Aetherdrift Standard. Isn't that exciting? Apart from that, last thing I have to say is that I love you very much. Again, if you made it to this part of the video, you're great. But I'll see you all again tomorrow. Twitch people, stick around for 5 or 10 minutes. And we'll hang out for a second. And then I'll get this onto YouTube. But anyway, if you are on YouTube, you're great. I love you. And I'll catch you later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.